Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. My name is Molly McLaughlin, and I own a company that optimizes sleep through technology, accountability, and behavioral change. Each week, I'll be interviewing world-class experts ranging from doctors, innovators, and thought leaders to give actionable tips and strategies that you can implement to become a more skillful sleeper. Let's jump into your dose of practical sleep training. Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. My guest today is an expert in mold. And why are we talking about mold on a sleep optimization podcast? Well, we are doing that because if you are looking to improve your sleep and you are living in an environment that has mold present in it, we might have some problems. So this podcast aims to take a deep dive on what you need to know about mold and sleep, if you have mold in your space, what you can do about it, and what are the steps that you need to be aware of, and more. So our guest's name is Michael Rubino, and he is an air quality expert and wellness advocate, helping to bridge the gap between our homes and their direct impact on health. He is the founder and CEO of HomeCleanse, formerly known as All American Restoration, a company dedicated to addressing the worldwide health epidemic caused by poor indoor air quality. He works closely with the company's advisory team, which includes global well-being trailblazers, Deepak Chopra's the Chopra Foundation and Gwyneth Paltrow, to achieve the company's mission to improve the quality of life for 100 million people each year by 2030. Rubino is also the founder of Change the Air Foundation, a nonprofit committed to empowering the world to achieve better health by establishing safer and healthier indoor environments. Quote, "I've helped over 1,000 people heal from toxic mold exposure so far, and this is just the beginning." Now, in the show notes, we are including lots of information on the next steps that you can take if you suspect that you have mold present in your space, or to take action on some of the resources that Michael mentioned in this podcast. So definitely check those out. And beyond that, if you are struggling with your sleep, don't forget that sleepisaskill.com was created. We created this just for the very reason that you're likely listening, to help support people in transforming their sleep. So if you're not on our newsletter, please jump on that. You can sign right up for that at sleepisaskill.com. And if you're looking for additional support to really transform your sleep, hop on over to our site. We've got cohorts, we've got one-on-one options, we're adding mini courses, all kinds of things are available for you to make sure that you are never stopped in this world of transforming your sleep. Then there's always things that you can do to take it to the next level. So I get a lot of questions around sleep supplements, and I'm very hesitant to just throw out a whole laundry list of possibilities. One, I don't think it's the most responsible thing to do. I really do believe in testing to see what types of supplements make sense for you. And two, because I really truly believe that most of the things that you can do to improve your sleep are behavioral, psychological, environmental in nature, and often don't cost a dime. However, there is one supplement that I personally take every day and that I do feel quite comfortable with suggesting for most individuals to experiment with because of a couple of reasons. Its high safety profile and high rates of deficiencies in our modern society. Some put the numbers as somewhere around 80% of the population being deficient in this one area, and that is magnesium. So magnesium has been called the calming mineral, and some report that magnesium can increase GABA, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level, which is critical for sleep. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating our body's stress response system. Those with magnesium deficiency usually have higher anxiety and stress levels, which negatively impact sleep as well. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most magnesium products out there are either synthetic or they only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when in reality, your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. So that's why I recommend a product from my friends over at BioOptimizers. They have created something called the Magnesium Breakthrough. And taking this magnesium before bed helps you relax and wake up refreshed and energized. And while we don't recommend that you go too nuts on looking at all the sleep stage classifications on all your wearables, I will share anecdotally that many clients have reported improvements in their deep sleep trend numbers. Again, I don't want you going nuts on the sleep stage classification numbers on your wearables, but I do want to let you know about that because I know that many of you do reach out on questions of how to improve your deep sleep. So I also love that BioOptimizers offers free shipping on select orders, and they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee on all their products. Plus, they have a customer satisfaction rating of 99.3%. Very impressive. And you can get 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough. Again, this is the same magnesium that I use every single night. And finally, you can get 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough. Again, that's the magnesium supplement that I use every single night by going to magbreakthrough.com/sleep is a skill. And be sure to use the code sleep is a skill for 10% off. And welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. I am so excited to discuss today's topic with our guest, Michael. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I know we already started, before we hit record, speaking to some of the things that we want to make sure we share for listeners today. And one of the things we were saying is that I think this is one of our first podcasts to really own this topic of mold and sleep and our aim is to go deep and give as many kind of practical takeaways for people in this realm of if you consider that maybe you have mold in your space and maybe that's what's impacting your sleep results, or maybe you hadn't considered it and this is your first time considering it, and wherever you might find yourself, then what to do about it. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here and share a little bit of like, how in the world did you get into this line of work and how can this connect with sleep?
Yeah, of course. I mean, what's really interesting about how I got into it, it was right after Hurricane Sandy. I'm in my mid-20s and I was working for my dad, who's a restoration contractor since I'm 5 years old. I started off working with him on summers. And even when I'm like 12 years old, I'm going to job sites and sweeping the broom and stuff like that and soaking it all in. But I never really thought about mold or bacteria and water damage and all the things that happen with that until after Hurricane Sandy. And it was really because of this pattern of people complaining of different ailments and symptoms they're experiencing inside their home. And, I'm looking at lab results and I'm not exactly sure what they mean at that exact time. But I'm looking at numbers that are high that shouldn't be high if the homes were supposedly fixed and whatnot. And as I started to really understand just the toxins that can happen when water damage takes shape inside of our homes, it really started to click. And I think part of what really defined my career is the fact that standardized remediation or water mitigation activities, they don't understand the fundamentals of microbiology, how there's living organisms that are creating particles and toxins that circulate across our home and opportunistically enter the body. And so the protocols really weren't developed for health purposes. I mean, even to this day, you still have industrial professionals that don't see the health connection between, mold and bacteria inside of our homes and the problems that it can create for the occupants inside. And of course, disrupting sleep is one of the many things that can happen. But it's just overall, the abundance of mold and bacteria inside of our homes is just not good for our health.
Absolutely. Okay. That's an incredible kind of backstory. And I'm so excited to dive in with you more today because it can occur, I think, for many as this wild west of where do you go? How do you what steps do we take if we do suspect this? And is it a lost cause? Do we just sort of just decide, well, it's an old house, it's moldy or whatever our kind of narrative might be in certain situation? Sometimes we see many people come our way that are just really tired, really exhausted and resigned to certain things that they've gotten used to in their environment. So I'm really excited to speak with someone like you that has created just a wealth of what appears to be different pathways for action for people. But before they even get to you, are there certain symptoms that they might see or certain things that they might want to be on the lookout for their environment? How do we think about this topic?
Well, insomnia is a big one just because there's a lot of mental and physical changes that can happen in a water damaged building. With the mental aspect, you're getting anxiety and depression. That can happen with bacteria, with mold, with the toxins that both can produce. And when you have anxiety and depression, of course, that's disrupting your sleep. It's very hard to sleep when your mind is racing nonstop. You also have the physical ailments with the dysbiosis that can happen inside the gut. I mean, basically, your microbiome of your home disrupts the microbiome of your body. And when that happens, you can get things like overgrowth of candida, mold physically colonizing, disrupting your gut system, which obviously impacts the gut-brain connection, which can really cause. And by the way, I'm not a doctor here. I'm an environmental expert, but I've spoken to many doctors and read many medical journals on this topic. And this is what is believed to happen when we have these water damage environments in our homes. And all of those things tie together, right? Our gut and brain connection, I think, is a very important aspect of health. And when that gets disrupted, there's so many different things that can take shape. And also, depending on the species of mold, there's species of bacteria, they can be an immune suppressant too. And so when you're suppressing your immune system, obviously a lot of things can happen there too. Mycophenolic acid, which is a toxin produced by a species of mold, for example, is what pharmaceutical companies utilize to create drugs that suppress your immune system, specifically for organ transplant patients. Because what you want to do is you want your immune system suppressed so that when you do this organ transplant, your body doesn't reject a new organ, right? Because it doesn't look at it as a foreign entity entering your body. So there's obviously uses of this, but if we know that it's an immune suppressant, then we also need to be careful about that, when we're having an abundance of it in our environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I definitely encourage people to check out your website. We'll include in the show notes and all the links, but you've got some great kind of rundown for people to really walk through on the entire laundry list of things that they might note, headaches and all of these things that might show up that they might never have linked together that could have molds potentially at play. And then also just these like unexpected areas in their environment that they might be on the lookout for, the fireplace and all of these different spots for mold that you might not be considering. So I love all this content on here. So further, now that if we're starting to say, oh, well, some of those symptoms sound like me, what's our next step from that place to then start to understand, are we a candidate to further test to ensure that we're aware of kind of what's at play in our environment?
One of the things that I'd love to see people do is test their environment, even if it doesn't check the box of the laundry list of symptoms that people typically talk about.
Sure.
And the reason I say this is because one of the biggest things with mold, besides the dysbiosis, right, we have inflammation. And when we talk about inflammation, we're associating that with like brain fog or fatigue and all these other things that we typically get with inflammation. And inflammation can be caused by so many different things, right? And I think we all know that at this point. Sure. Almost any ad that I see online on Facebook or Instagram or what have you, it's always like brain fog, fatigue, take this or take that. And like there's all these 100,000 different reasons why you have it. And I think the root cause comes back to inflammation. And if we create healthier environments for ourselves, how much will that benefit inflammation? I believe a lot. And the reason I believe that is because for the thousands of people that I've helped create healthier environments, every time I get a call back, I feel amazing. Gwyneth Paltrow is one of my clients. I just did a podcast with her. And she's like, Michael, I just turned 50 years old this year. I feel like I'm 28 again.
Wow.
No BS, right?
What a testimonial.
What a testimonial. But I think the reality of it is that we're so used to normalizing how we feel. Sure. And especially when we don't feel our best, we say like, oh, I'm just getting older. I'm not sleeping well. It's just part of getting older. And, I have kids, or all the different reasons that we tend to, make excuses for ourselves. I think the reality of it is that when we look at health and wellness, right, we know that we can biohack. We know there's all these things we can do to help with that. We know that we can drink more water, drink cleaner water, right? We know we can eat better food. Heck, we know we can exercise. But no one's ever thinking about the quality of the air that they're breathing. And if they do, they think, all right, I'll buy an air purifier and plug it in and I'm set. And unfortunately, I think as a society, we haven't been educated much on the effects of environmental toxins like mold, like bacteria, and even viruses too. And so what I urge people to do is test your environment. You can do that at your home today, right now. You don't need to call a professional. You can buy tests to test your environment. And the best way to do that is actually to test the dust. And I'm sure you're going to ask me why, so I'll let you do that.
Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. Why?
But because air quality, people think like, oh, I test the air for air quality. No, you test the dust. And the reason being is because anything that is circulating through our air, it is eventually going to settle on a surface, just like our dust does. And then it becomes part of our dust. It binds with our dust, right? And so when we test the air, any instrument used to test the air is typically very small, meaning it's meant to pick up very small particles. And once you have particles bound with dust, the dust itself is too large to be picked up. And it's also not sorting dust and finding particles amongst dust to then analyze. So you end up missing a lot of what you're actually being exposed to when you test your air versus testing your dust. When you test your dust, you're actually getting an accurate measure of what am I being exposed to. And I'll give you a nice analogy here. You have this amazing glass behind you, right?
Yes.
And I know it's a gloomy day, so this is going to be hard to do. But how many times have you spun around on that chair and you've seen a ray of light pass before you in that beautiful open space there and seen dust particles kind of floating around in front of you?
Yeah, definitely. When it's a sunny day, for sure.
And probably the first thought that goes to your mind is like, wow, there's that much stuff in the air that I'm breathing in.
Right. Yes.
And then you just kind of blank it out and go about your day and you forget about it. But the reality of it is our dust is everywhere and our eyes are so accustomed to seeing through it that it only catches our attention when light refracts off of the actual particles, where you see how many particles are floating. So with that being said, our dust is constantly aerosolizing, recirculating across our environment and opportunistically entering our body. You want to know why that is?
I want to know why that is.
Okay. It's because we take 20,000 breaths per day. Crazy, right? 20,000 breaths per day. So every time you're taking a breath, right now I'm inhaling dust particles sitting in front of this computer screen. And it is, either good or bad. Now, what would make it good? Well, if I don't have that many contaminants like mold, bacteria, toxins, formaldehyde, you name it, inside the dust that I'm breathing, it's not a bad thing. Our bodies have mucous membranes. We're going to kind of filter this stuff out. It's no problem. But if we have all of these things in our dust, it's going to become a problem, right? Because if you look at, American Lung Association, for example, they'll tell you that particle size matters. And the reason being is that anything smaller than 10 microns, which is mold, bacteria, viruses, formaldehyde, et cetera, toxins, is the greatest health hazard because it is so small. It bypasses our self-defense mechanisms and enters our bloodstream immediately, goes right through the lungs, starts to break into the blood. And once it's in the bloodstream, guess what happens? It then starts to migrate into the gut. It starts to migrate into the brain. And that's where we start to have issues. Now, if we have a little bit of mold, not a big deal. There's a little bit of mold outside right now when you go out and take a breath. But the problem is that a lot of people, they have a lot more than a little bit. And the best way to really know is to test your dust, like I've just mentioned. But I think that's where people start to get into trouble. They have water damage events. They think it was repaired properly. It wasn't. They have stuff going on inside their home. It's circulating across the house. And they get into the situation where they start to slowly degrade until they don't feel well. And I think for me, my goal is to help people before they even get to that point. And we can only do that through the power of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so interesting, and especially interesting, this concept of really getting granular about the number of breaths we're taking certainly while we're awake. And then when we go into the realm of sleep, we have so many people that struggle with air quality while they're breathing, and it's affecting their readouts of, if they're sleep tracking, they might see in different environments. If they're traveling to hotels or they've, multiple homes that they live in, they might see very different type of respiratory rate readings than depending on where they are and which environment. So meaning they might have higher breaths per minute that they're taking while they're sleeping in certain areas, and potentially indicating, more of a struggle with the respiratory rates that they're having read out for them, depending on where they are. And one of the things that is concerning is if they are dealing with things like sleep apnea and they're using CPAPs, and then they're taking in the air in the environment, kind of shuttling it right down their throats, essentially. And if we're not being mindful of the quality of that air, then, it's something to consider that maybe we don't always pause and reflect on. So I really appreciate you calling that out so that we're not leaving people in this space of like, oh no, our environment's out to get us or what have you. What are some of the ways that we can start to think about taking action in this area?
Yeah. And before I answer that, I want to piggyback off something you said about sleep specifically.
Please.
Not only do you have this REM cycle where you're taking more breaths, maybe deeper breaths, et cetera, but you're also lower to the ground when you sleep, right? Than you typically are when you're walking around. You're spending 8 hours or more, or maybe a little less, but around that time frame, closer to the ground, where you have much more accumulation of dust that's circulating, that's getting into your breathing zone as you sleep. And so having a cleaner environment is going to be really helpful. We'll get to how do you create a clean environment. Great. Well, it's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. And I think it's more complex in execution, but we're going to kind of make this as easy as possible. We first have to identify as what makes an unhealthy environment. Well, two things. One, if you have a lot of living organisms like mold and bacteria, they're alive, right? And what they do is they reproduce. They create spores, which are basically like their version of seeds that aerosolize, look for moisture, and wherever there's moisture, voila, there's another living organism starting to grow and colonize. And so it's kind of how it replicates across our home. Water damage, HVACs that constantly condensate, bathrooms, kitchens. That's why we always see mold problems in our grout or in our silicone. But the key is that you want to identify where are these living organisms and I want to remove them, right? And when you test your dust, you can really get a sense of what's abnormally high, where those living organisms might be growing, right? Then we get to the second stage of this. It's very simple. These living organisms are constantly producing particles. Then they settle and they migrate with our dust. And so it's really important to have I don't want to say dust-free home because I think that's crazy talk. It's impossible, but we want to have as minimal amount of dust in our home as possible. If you ever notice something about dust, it's really interesting. What happens if you stop dusting? Well, the dust builds up. It doesn't just like go away on its own. It doesn't just disappear. It's just going to continue to build up. If you've ever gone away on vacation and come back and you have like a layer of dust all over your stuff, you know exactly what I mean. And so we have to routinely stay up on top of dusting because when we dust, we're not just removing dead hair and skin cells, we're removing mold and bacteria and toxins and all these other things that accumulate in our environment. So it's really important that we do that. The other thing that we can do, it's something very simple people can do right now is, there's one thing that people never really think about, and it's their HVAC filters. All right. Now, listen, I know that we're all culprits of this, including myself. We have these filters that we're supposed to change every couple of months. And some of you listening right now are like, man, I didn't change my filter. It's probably been like 6 months, maybe even longer. And it's really important that we change those as often as we should, because when they get clogged, they're no longer working effectively, meaning particles are passing through. And so it's really important that we do that. We also want to look at the rating of that filter. It's very important. This can go parallel into the discussion of air purifiers, but essentially we want to make sure that the filter we're using can remove as small of a particle as possible, because we talked about particle size matters. Smaller particles are a bigger health hazard. So we want to try to remove as small of a particle as possible. They do that by what's called a MERV rating. So the MERV rating, the higher the rating, the smaller the particle it removes. And so if we remember that, we'll be able to get, better ratings for HVAC and whatnot. Now, you always want to kind of consult with somebody who knows this stuff when you're doing that, because if you get too good of a filter and the system isn't handled appropriately for that filter, you can cause problems with the HVAC, like coil freezing and whatnot. The best filter I know is a MERV 16 that has the pressure drop of a MERV 8. So that means that it's like installing a MERV 8 filter. You don't have to worry about freezing the coil, but it has the efficiency of a MERV 16. And so there's stuff like that you can look for to install inside your HVAC as better filtration. But it is something that I've seen as a huge problem in homes, because most people, they have no idea what filters are. They just buy whatever they see at the store. They put it in and they forget it. And I think a lot more attention needs to be paid around that, because actually all an air purifier is basically a vacuum with a filter on it that sucks all these particles in, traps them, and blows that clean air back out.
So good. And speaking of the air purifier, if now people, if they're having them think newly and saying, oh, shoot, one, I haven't changed my filter. I got to do that. And then maybe while I'm at it, I don't have an air purifier. Maybe I have some little thing that I got from Amazon or whatever. And they're actually now inspired to potentially look at investing in a more heavy duty air purifier. How do you have any guidance on how to think about selecting air purifier that really will do the work?
Totally. So I had a client call me probably about 2 weeks ago and was like, look, I can't afford one of these $1,000 air purifiers.
Sure.
I need something for like $300. What can we do? And we like shared screen. I went on Zoom, then went through Amazon and found one for like $300. And the key is, again, it's like the same, it's the filter conversation.
Okay.
You want to find one that can remove as small of a particle as possible. In this case, we found one that can remove as small as 1 micron, which mold, for example, is typically between 2 and 4 microns. So 1 micron would remove mold completely from the air, which was a great thing. And it was, I think, $300. So it was perfectly within her price range, and we were able to do it. And so I think the biggest cost around air purifiers is all these bells and whistles these companies put into these things that, I mean, might have some, I guess, user functionality that makes it cool. But at the end of the day, you only care about one thing. You don't care about any technologies or anything else other than how efficient is this filter? How small of a particle is it going to remove? That's what's actually going to be important for air quality purposes.
I so appreciate you calling out too that we don't have to just cut off possibility based on what our current budget might be, because it can occur for, I think, a lot of people that it's going to be so expensive that it's just out of our reach. So I appreciate that you share that there can be these different tiers and you can still have accessibility to some of these that can make a difference just by being aware of some of these things that are important to really clean the air. So that's great. And I know you have a shop page on your store, like on your website too, from the looks of it too. So if they want to look at some of the ones that you believe in, that's available from what I see. So that's great.
I think accessibility has been one of the biggest problems in my career that I've been trying to solve. And if you go on our website at our shop, we put together more affordable packages to create a healthy environment between cleaning products and kits that have extension poles and microfiber mops that can help you wipe down your walls. Like, when's the last time anyone wiped down their walls? It's not something people frequently do. But believe it or not, dust can collect on your walls. And so if you don't dust your walls, you want to at least do so probably once or twice a year at a minimum. The goal is we want to make sure people have access to clean air. And I think that has been some of the biggest challenges that I've had to face in my career, is helping people with any budget create a healthier environment. And I think one of the real positive things that I learned was you got to help people take a step forward. And I think that's the key. I mean, we get overwhelmed sometimes just as human beings, right?
Yes.
And we're like, what step do I take? And my goal is always, if people give me a budget and say, I have $250, what do I do? I will figure out what is the best bang for the buck. It might not be perfect, but it's going to be better than what it is. And I think if we start making things better than what it is and we start moving the ball forward, I think as a civilization, we'll be a lot healthier for it. And I think part of the problem has been awareness around air quality, people just not knowing that air quality is such a big piece of the missing puzzle here. And then just accessibility to air quality. And so I'm trying to solve those two things. And I won't say that I have it fully solved yet, but I'm making progress. I'm taking my own steps in the right direction to help people take those steps in the right direction.
Amazing. Well, I'm so happy to hear that. I mean, I grew up with not a lot of money, and certainly in retrospect in moldy environments that, granted generational shifts and not necessarily being aware, but also I could imagine even if we really knew the magnitude of what we were living in, just not having the resources or assuming that we didn't have the resources to take real concerted action to shift what that type of environment is. So I so appreciate when people are looking to make this something that we can all kind of democratizing this ability to have clean air. So that's a big deal. One question we get a lot too is about humidity. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. So people will say, what's the ideal level of humidity in their bedroom while they're sleeping, and how can that affect sleep quality? And then they might bring in like humidifiers and all kinds of things. But I'm curious from a mold perspective, if you have an ideal, or if you think that can solve, like bring about possible other problems with all these humidifiers or dehumidifiers, and how you think about that.
There are so many different organizations that offer guidance on humidity. I will tell you my sweet spot is 40 to 45%.
Sure.
And the reason being is because, something like mold or bacteria, they're going to thrive especially certain species can thrive in an environment with just 60% relative humidity or more. And so I think from that standpoint, I want to have it a little further away from that point so that something happens or it's really humid outside, right? We get a little bit of a buffer there. Obviously, there's too low humidity is kind of uncomfortable. That's where your skin starts to crack and get dry. That's where your lips get chapped and stuff like that. But it also could cause like structural issues too. I mean, wood obviously needs a moisture content level. And so if you're constantly dehumidifying, you're getting this thing below 30%, you can cause some damage to the, wood artifacts inside your home and structure of your home, et cetera. So I think 40 to 45% is a really good sweet spot. I think the takeaway people should know is you can control it. You either want a dehumidifier if it's too humid or a humidifier if it's too little humidity. The one careful thing about a humidifier, right? Anytime you're adding humidity, it's a little scary because if you add too much, right, now you're in the danger zone where these spores and stuff can become, active colonies of living organisms. So what I would say is always look for one that has some sort of humidistat, meaning you can control the humidity that it's set to so that it'll turn on when it gets too low and it'll turn off right when you set it to, I would set it to like 45%. So turns on if it's below 40%, turns off when it gets to 45%. And it'll just kind of hold in that sweet zone. This way you don't have to worry about too much humidity because believe me, I've had clients call me and say, my walls are sweating, left the humidifier on and went away for the weekend. And I came back and my walls are soaking wet and there's a weird odor going on here. What do I do? And it's like, oh man. So it's something to be mindful of for sure.
Got it. No, so good. And quick question. We have a lot of people getting some sort of using heat therapy in prep for sleep. So with the paradoxical effect of when you are exposed to heat, then kind of cooling the body temperature thereafter. So we might have them doing like hot baths, hot showers. And the thing I'm thinking of in particular is a lot of people with saunas. Any call outs there about mold in saunas or anything that you've seen for that?
When you take hot baths, hot showers, typically your bathroom's going to have an exhaust fan. Make sure you turn it on. Leave it running for a good 10, 15 minutes after just to help escape all that humidity out. When it comes to saunas, a lot of us, we buy these saunas and we just kind of put them in our closets or something in random places across our home, wherever it's going to fit, right? The issue is that they're supposed to actually have ventilation, meaning it's supposed to take that hot, humid air out of the house. And so a lot of them, when we put them in our closets and things like that, it doesn't do that. I mean, we're just kind of plopping it there and plugging it in. And I think the real issue there is, of course, if we're adding all that humidity into our closet and we're getting our clothes all wet and we're getting the walls all wet, we create this problem where our closet itself might start growing mold, might start growing bacteria, things of that nature. So it's really important that we get those properly installed. I mean, they're awesome. I love saunas. I have such an amazing health story around saunas. But I think that it's really important to make sure that the sauna itself is well ventilated.
Good call. Yeah. One of the takeaways I'm even getting with this too, and we had Ryan from Test My Home happened to come over. He's great, kind of went through our place and all of these kind of conversations. I feel like it's an opportunity for more up-leveling and mindfulness in these places that we are living every single day and spending all this time in, and to a level that we might not have considered from the moment you step in. Are you taking off your shoes? Are you, when you talk, the amount of, kind of changing that just even talking can bring into the space from a quality perspective. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that one, because that one still blows my mind that like the more people you have in your space, you might want to air out thereafter. I'm learning.
Well, gosh, it's really interesting. Basically, when you walk into a space, you're talking, maybe you laugh, maybe you sneeze, maybe you cry. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Things happen.
Yeah.
Your microbiome is entering into the space. And for those that don't know, you have like 100 trillion bacteria in you right now. And so basically, yes, your microbiome mixes with everyone else's microbiome. And this happens at restaurants and all these other places that we go to. This is why, like during COVID, it was just a very mentally challenging time because it's really hard to create a safe place for people without thinking about all these different variables.
Right.
And as you know, a lot of the COVID response was we wear masks, we do all these things.
Sure.
And I'm not saying it didn't help,
Yep.
but there was a lot more to this to create a safe and healthy place that was not paid attention to, which I think drove a lot of other scientists and probably experts like myself a little crazy during this time period.
I bet.
But with respects to kind of the conversation, it's like, yeah, we're going to exchange microbiome with each other. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's nothing to be afraid of. It happens whether you realize it or not.
Sure.
I think it really just comes down to, it's so important that the air you're breathing most of the time, 90% of the time we spend indoors, is a healthy one, because you're going to go out in the world and you're going to get stuff from other people. When you walk in the soil, you're bringing in bacteria with you. When you have pets that play around outside, they're bringing bacteria in with them. You have to kind of look at this stuff, because when our immune system gets overloaded, this is when we start to feel not so great. And obviously, in terms of being healthy, we want to kind of control what we can. We're still going to go out there and get sick in the world because other people are going to go out and get sick in the world. And it's just going to happen. It's part of life, unfortunately. But if we create a healthier environment for ourselves where we spend most of our time, our immune system is going to be a lot stronger, because it's not always fighting. It's not always hyperactive. I don't know if you've ever heard of mast cell activation syndrome.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a whole syndrome about how your white blood cells are essentially hyperactive and always in that fight or flight state where it's just like ready to attack. Yeah. We don't want that. We want our minds and our bodies to be calm and be able to fight whatever we're going to have to fight out in the world. And we do that by creating as safe and healthy of a place as we possibly can in our own homes, in this offices and spaces we work in and spend a lot of time in.
Yeah, so well said. One of the things, just from one piece on the sleep perspective, this call out of, say if you have, and hopefully people aren't necessarily having it look like this, but some people have their partners and their kids and the dog and the whatever, this whole party happening in a small enclosed bedroom. And one of the things we've heard from certain experts speaking to carbon dioxide levels rising with all of that, just generalized breathing in a small confined space. Is that anything that you think is anything for us to be mindful of, or is that kind of outside of the scope on the, as far as the mold topic?
I'm not an expert on the exposure of carbon dioxide for sure, but what I will say is this: I think we build a lot tighter buildings these days for energy efficiency. And I think that's definitely creating a problem, because when you have a bunch of people in a space, obviously the amount of carbon dioxide that's going to be in the air is sucking away the amount of oxygen that's in the air, right? And so we're constantly having, in these spaces, we're just breathing in less and less oxygen and more carbon, which I think is going to be obviously a problem along the road here. I think we have to start switching our building mentality from just energy efficiency to also healthy, right? And with energy efficiency, it's like we want as minimal air exchange as possible, because with that air exchange, we're getting loss of temperature, we're loss of heating and cooling, which is going to mean more energy to create more heating and cooling. And I get that. I also don't want to see people getting sick.
Right.
And so we just got to find some middle ground, right? Let's use sustainable building materials. Let's have as energy efficiency as possible, but let's be healthy. And I think healthy needs to be at the top, because it doesn't matter if we're energy efficient if we're not having a quality of life.
So well said. So I'm sure everyone listening, clearly, not every day you hear from such a clear mold expert that knows such in-depth information on these topics. So I'm curious to learn from you how you've set up some of your habits and routines, ways that we might be able to kind of learn more about how we might be able to bring these habits into our own lives. So we do always ask every guest 4 questions. And the first question that I'm curious about your response is, what is your nightly sleep routine looking like right now?
Okay, so my nightly sleep routine, first I have to get the kids to bed. So that's step 1, which, sometimes I'm more tired than they are. And it's a struggle of who's going to stay awake to get upstairs. After we get through that part, I like calcium, magnesium. So basically, I have a glass of calcium and magnesium. It's like a little mixed drink that I make. And I have that every night before bed. For those that don't know, I mean, magnesium is absorbed into the body better when it's paired with calcium. It's one of those things. And not only do I have a magnesium deficiency, but I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And magnesium is really helpful for sleep. It calms your nerves, calms your mind, and helps me get to sleep. And I'll tell you, I mean, I typically put on a show and maybe 15, 20 minutes into the show, I'm passed out. So it takes me about 4 days to get through one episode of anything for those that figured out the math there. I also typically keep a book. And so it depends if I'm awake enough to where I want to read as opposed to watch something for 10 minutes and fall asleep. I'll do that, but just depends on the night.
So good. Awesome. Okay. So no struggle with sleep onset for you, it sounds like.
No. I have the problem where I sleep hard as a rock. And so waking me up, if there's a fire, that's the biggest health hazard that we have here.
Amazing. Okay. And so what might we see for your morning sleep routine, with the argument that kind of how we set up our days can impact our nights?
Yeah. So I set my alarm for about a half an hour before I need to get up. And I do the whole stare at the ceiling for a little while and just give my body some time to kind of, I do some stretching while I'm laying down and just give my body some time to really wake up. I find that if I set my alarm and then rush out of bed, I'm shot all day. And so just giving myself a little bit of time to just kind of wake up and before I kind of jump out of bed and hit the day, I think has been really helpful. And depending on the day, I would say that, well, I live in Florida. We talked about that beforehand. And so when it's nice out, and it's nice a lot, which is nice, I like to do some walks, in the morning time. Past couple of weeks have been crazy, so I haven't been doing it as much.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, but that's been always like a fun morning ritual, taking a walk down to the coffee shop, grabbing a coffee or tea or what have you, and coming back has been great. And just nothing better than that fresh air on a nice sunny day. And if anybody has time to walk, I encourage it.
I love that. That is one of our favorite recommendations for people, is to get that kind of morning walk each day so that you can get that resetting of your master clock, especially when you can just link it up with, the kind of that positive energy of being able to get that walk in. If you get a little caffeine, spacing it out, depending on if your cortisol levels are really high, giving yourself a little bit of time, but getting that bright sunlight can be so impactful. I love that. Okay. So then one of our third questions would be, what might we see on your nightstand or proverbial nightstand if you are traveling?
Well, I usually am always asking friends for book recommendations. I'm always reading books. Which book is on I think it's the $100 million offer or something is on my nightstand right now. So Alex Ramosi, somebody recommended that.
Oh yeah. He's having a moment for sure.
He's having a moment. So, I'm curious to see how good this moment is. I've heard great things. I'd say I've always got a book on the nightstand. I always try to finish at least a book a month, just depending on everything else. The calcium magnesium is always on my nightstand. I drink that every single night, as I mentioned earlier. I have a lamp for when I want to read, of course, because, got to be able to see. And I think that's it. I guess, a phone charger, of course, got to charge a phone. I've got this bed where my nightstand's kind of lower than my bed. It's like one of those weird platform things.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'm not in love with it. I probably won't get one like that again, but I put my phone on airplane mode and just kind of put it on the charger right below me. And I think that's it. I mean, I'm sure that other people have given some really crazy responses that have been fantastic, but
what's so great is one of the things we've seen is that often in minimalism and the simplicity, that can actually be often a good sign from what we see. So often less is more, depending on how much, stress load people are putting into this topic of sleep. So sometimes there can be an over fixation and there's 20 things on there and, can indicate that there might be some other things at play. So I appreciate that simplicity, and sometimes just less possible distractions and things rabbit holes to go down when there's not as much there.
That's true.
So, yes. So good. Okay. So then the last question would be, what would you say has made the biggest change to your sleep game, or maybe biggest aha moment in managing your own sleep?
Well, actually, detoxing to really answer this question, I think has been invaluable. We talked about saunas earlier. I mean, I did the sauna program last year, and the craziest thing, I mean, I was sleeping better. I think that going in people's homes for like the past 10 years, just the amount of crap that has come into my body, even if you wear a mask and all the stuff, it's not 100%, right? And so I started a couple of years ago, I started gaining weight rapidly, like gained like 50 pounds over the course of like a year and a half, something to that effect. Didn't change my diet. It's not like I was taking vitamins, stopped taking. There was nothing, no explanation. I started really getting into the biohacking community, listening to people empowered to take advantage of their own internal system here and fix it, right? And so people talking a lot about red light therapy and detoxing, all this stuff. And of course, being in the air quality space and creating healthy environments for people, there's a lot about binders and detoxing and all this stuff that people go through to kind of remove these toxins from their body. And I just was like, it's got to be that, right? There can't be anything else. Because I'm starting to feel like one of my clients. I'm like, I got some brain fog. I'm groggy when I wake up. I'm pretty tired. Wait, I gained like 50 pounds. Maybe I have mold, right?
Yep.
And so it's really interesting. I did this sauna program. It was intense. It was 21 days. It was like medically supervised. I started off like 2 hours. Then it was like 2.5, then three, all the way to 5 hours. So 5 hours a day in the sauna. Yeah, no, you got to do it. You got to do it supervised. Really important because, obviously if you don't know what you're doing, you could pass out. It could be very dangerous, but basically you have to drink a lot of water, obviously, because you're kind of sweating a lot out. If you get too hot, you take cold showers and stuff, cool your body down. But essentially, I mean, if you do it right, it's really beneficial. The first 7 days, I wasn't sweating at all. I mean, it was like 140 degrees and I have like little beads of sweat. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm taking like salt, potassium, trying to get some stuff going here. After the 7th day, all of a sudden, it was like, I don't know what happened. Like a blockage was released. And all of a sudden, I'm like sweating like I should be in 140 degrees. I mean, like profusely sweating. And that was the day that I realized like, wow, this is really interesting. I can't believe that I didn't think about all these toxins that could potentially be built up in my body, especially going in all the homes that I've gone into and stuff like that. And within 21 days, I was like sleeping amazing, waking up, feeling amazing, eating the same. And I lost 35 pounds last year doing this program. It's February. I just lost another 10 pounds in January. And I'm making it like my annual routine of like detoxing and kind of doing my thing. And my sleep has been phenomenal. I mean, I was the type of guy who would go to sleep at like 2, 3 in the morning and then wake up at like 7, 8 and, 4 or 5 hours of sleep just because I had to get the day going, but I was having trouble sleeping at night. Now you won't catch me up past like 10 o'clock, and so it's definitely been a sleep transformation, just kind of looking at all the things that come into contact with the body externally and making sure that I'm taking care of my body internally. I'm not where I want to be. Health is a journey. It's never an end destination, but I'm on the road and that's all that matters.
Wow, that's amazing. I so appreciate you sharing that too. And I think it can resonate for so many listeners too. And like, just suddenly you start to notice these symptoms that just are occurring. And even if we're in this space, even if we're learning about all these things, we know these things and these things happen for us. And sometimes it can take that step back and then really getting committed to make that difference. And so I so appreciate that. And congratulations. That's huge. Is there a name of like that protocol, or is that just something that a particular doctor is doing? That's so cool.
Yeah, it's just like it's called like the purification protocol or something to that effect. It's essentially, it takes as long as it takes. It could be like 21 days or 40 days. I forget the exact, I think mine was like 25 days or something. But you take a crap ton of vitamins, drink a crap ton of water. You do everything like, what's the right word? On a gradient. So you kind of dip your toe in the water. And then as you start to handle it better, you kind of go more and more and more. You're taking a lot of B vitamins. You're helping flush stuff out of your fat cells. I mean, toxins are unfortunately stored in the fat layer of cells. Our bodies typically tend to want to hold on to fat as a way of insulating ourselves from toxins. And so for me, it was really hard to get rid of fat if my body was trying to protect myself from it. And so once I started kind of releasing the toxins from the fat cells, I promise you, I did not change my diet at all. Been eating nothing but like cauliflower rice and chicken and, super healthy. And all of a sudden the weight just started kind of falling off me. It was one of those things where I never understood in the first place how the heck I gained so much weight so fast. Like you would think I was eating cheeseburgers 3 times a day, but it's really interesting how the body works. And I think anyone in the biohacking community that's had experience kind of changing things about what they're exposing themselves to or different therapies they're doing, it's things that you would never think mentally, should this work, works, right? And so I think it's really cool. And I think the sauna and sweating with the right program and right regimen, binders, whatever you want to do that works for you, I think can be really, really helpful. It helped me a lot.
That is so great. Well, thank you for sharing about that, because for the listeners, if they are hearing this possibility, maybe newly considering, maybe I need to test my home for levels of mold, look at this dust, and let's do a whole overhaul. And then to also know that in conjunction, there can be some of these steps that they could take from, this heat therapy perspective, red light, et cetera, can just potentially be really empowering for people. So that's great. Now, as people are listening, I'm sure they want to know, all right, so I know this guy is helping to really help make it more accessible to be able to test for these things and to take the next appropriate steps. So what would be some of the steps that they could take to learn more about what some of those offerings you've made available are?
Yeah, I mean, if they go over to like homecleanse.com, there's a shop. Basically what I did was I created all these different kits. One of the main products that I love is called Benefact. I don't manufacture it, but it's a professional grade product, meaning like you can't go to Home Depot or Walmart and pick it up. And it's one of the best products out there. And they're just not interested in the consumer market. So we've created kits with that product because it works phenomenally. And we wanted people to have access to it that typically don't have access to it. It's going to sound really dumb, but there's a special mop that I like really well.
Really? Okay.
It's a microfiber mop, but it's flexible. So like if you don't have perfectly straight walls or floors, it can mold to the floor or the wall. And, like I said, most people listening probably have never cleaned their walls before. I mean, honestly, It's not something that people typically know to do. But if you use this mop, which, it's like this big, you can do a wall in like 2 minutes, right? Because otherwise you're kind of wiping a wall down with a rag. It's going to take forever. And so I put all these thoughtful packages together for someone who's living in maybe 1,000 square foot apartment to someone who might have a 5,000 square foot home. And this way, everybody in between can get access to different things, perfect for their home, to keep their home clean. Everything that I use is botanical, non-toxic, because I think, it's 2023 and we don't need chemicals or toxic products to get the job done. And as far as the testing capabilities, I developed a product called the Dust Test, and it's thedusttest.com. And it's the first at-home PCR-based testing methodology for the dust. And for those that, I know PCR is like the scar word from COVID, but this isn't something you put up your nose. This is something, it's the same. It's a technology that analyzes that swab that you put up your nose, but it's DNA-based technology that analyzes your dust. So you're collecting dust with like like almost like a Swiffer cloth, if you will. And you're going to be able to tell different species of molds and the quantity. I mean, quantification is really important. Some people may have heard of like those little tests you get at like Home Depot or just like turns purple or something. That's not really helpful because it turns purple, but you don't know like, okay, what kind? Is this a dangerous kind? Okay, wait, is there a lot or a little? It's just going to turn purple. At least with this, you'll have everything you need to know, probably more data than you'd really care for. But I think it's really important because you want to see what's abnormally high, what's a concern, what's not a concern, and the things that are a concern, now you can do something about it pretty quickly.
So good. That's great. Well, I am just so grateful that you've taken the time to share all of this with us. Did we leave anything out in this conversation around sleep and mold and some of these tests and different products that people can be aware of? I love the particular type of kind of mop and just all of that thing. I mean, all of this is so great because it gets people thinking newly on some of these actions that they can really take like today to transform their environment. Is there anything we left out?
Oh, so I can guarantee you we left things out. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about here today. But no, I think we have a really good actionable game plan for folks who may have never heard about, the effects air quality can have, who might be really interested in what I had to say today and can take that next step forward of figuring out what they're going to do about it. My goal is to get people empowered, to get people knowledgeable around this so that they can take whatever steps that they can take on their own and start to move the needle forward. And hopefully my belief, and this is a belief, again, I mentioned earlier, I'm not a doctor, my belief based upon a lot of the research that I've done, I think that air quality is a big missing piece of the holistic health puzzle that could help us resolve one of the craziest statistics that I know of, which is over 50% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. My belief is that if we paid more attention to air quality, I think that number would come down.
I really feel like you're onto something, because one of the things that we cite so often is that old study out of the EPA on one of the things you were speaking to around how much we're spending our time inside, over the 90% mark, either homes or automobiles. And that one was done so long ago. So it's likely potentially even higher at this point after a pandemic and Netflix and and all the things. So we're spending all this time inside. So we're a big stand for kind of this concept of rewilding. We're particularly thinking about that as it relates to being aligned with these rhythms of nature. And I think we can do even more to speak to just how important that can be from a perspective of the air that you're breathing when you are actually getting yourself physically outside and not being kind of trapped inside these like Tupperware containers, which are really our home environment nowadays. So really, really appreciate the work they're doing in the education factor, but then also inspiring people to be able to take actions no matter what their budget is. So really encourage people to check out your site, because I think there's really something for everyone. We'll be including all that in the show notes, and just really want to thank you for coming on today and for the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Sleep is a Skill podcast, the #1 podcast for people who want to take their sleep skills to the next level. Every Monday, I send out something that I call Molly's Monday Obsessions, containing everything that I'm obsessing over in the world of sleep. Head on over to sleepisaskill.com to sign up.